President Donald Trump says the United States is in a non international armed conflict with some Central and South American drug cartels. So, what does that mean, and why are so many military legal experts crying foul? In the last few weeks, the United States military blew up at least four suspected drug boats, killing at least 20 people. In a document sent to Congress, President Trump said everyone killed was an unlawful combatant taking part in a non international armed conflict, or NIAC. The designation typically describes a situation when violence occurs between a country and a non state actor or between two non state actors. The United Nations says in order for a situation to be considered an NIAC, it must meet two criteria. The non state party must be organized with a unified central command structure, and the violence between the parties must be sufficiently intense.
In terms of what's happening today, the administration is using the language when they say unlawful combatants in an armed conflict. They're using the language that's codified in the international law of armed conflict, and under the same legal auspices that the Bush administration used after 9/11, particularly because this administration has designated cartels as a foreign terrorist organization. That gives them lawful right to go after, at least lawful right from an American perspective, to go after these organizations who the administration has said is in armed conflict with the United States. And there's actually a lot of freedom, if you will, or there's a lot of space for that action.
As a result of those recent changes, the president is essentially moving the mission of international drug interdiction in the region from a law enforcement duty, typically performed by the Coast Guard with military support, to more of a direct military operation, governed by military rules of engagement. Retired Admiral and former Democratic Congressman Joe Seastack says the move puts sailors in a difficult position.
I've done drug interdictions down there. We always had a lead det, a law enforcement detachment from the Coast Guard aboard. Now, we might have launched our helicopter, and in order to interdict them, we had the capability to shoot the rudder so that it couldn't steer any longer. It would make it easy then for the Coast Guard det to go aboard. And then the process always for them, if they found them, was that they would be arrested and they'd have due process and go to a trial. That's the way it is. And it's primarily that because these are civilians. And if there's one thing we learn, and it's actually in the handbook, the commander's handbook for the law of naval operations, is that we don't attack civilians. I thought when I read about this that this was wrong to do that.
President Trump and his Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, obviously don't see it the same way. By calling them unlawful combatants, the White House is putting these suspected drug smugglers in the same class as Al Qaeda or ISIS terrorists. Instead of drone strikes, IEDs, or armed assaults, though, this current enemy's weapon of choice is drugs.
You have to think of it this way. Every one of those boats is responsible for the death of 25,000 American people and the destruction of families. So when you think of it that way, what we're doing is actually an act of kindness. But we did another one last night. Now we just can't find any. You know, it's the old story. We're so good at it that there are no boats. In fact, even fishing boats, nobody wants to go into the water anymore. Sorry to tell you that. But we're stopping drugs coming into America, if that's okay. We're stopping drugs at a level that nobody's ever seen before. Last year, we lost, I believe, 300,000 people. And that's not talking about the destruction to families.
That figure of 300,000 dead Americans that President Trump is using to partly justify designating cartel members as unlawful combatants is greatly exaggerated, though. The Centers for Disease Control says the U.S. actually saw a drop in overdose deaths last year, with just over 80,000 Americans dying. That's down almost 27% from the year before. Critics of the new designation say putting a new label on an old problem does not transform the problem itself, or grant U.S. presidents or the military expanded legal authorities to kill civilians.
I think it's nonsense. And I say that because it's also harmful. What prevents someone from making in a foreign country a similar decision about something else? I mean, one might say we have 100,000 car accidents every year. Do we sue? Do we go after the automobile companies? And I don't know, that's a stretch. But you truly are changing some accepted international and national definitions of what hostilities are. And I think that's wrong. And I think it's harmful. And I believe this because where does it take you to the next step? Does that mean that we can go after them in a foreign country like Venezuela? Can we strike them here? It opens the door to that if this is accepted, let's say, by the Supreme Court as a new definition.
Something you said there about the rules of, if we change the rules and the Supreme Court accepts these new rules for unlawful combatants, are we allowed to strike them here? I mean, in your mind, and obviously we're postulating here, but if we change those rules, does that free up local law enforcement to, shoot combatants on sight because we're at war with them?
Yeah, well, that kind of, you might just turn that slightly and say, does that legalize the military to do that? Because now they have become a law enforcement, so to speak, force here in America. And if there's anything our founding fathers did not want to have, was have a military, they didn't even want to have a standing army. And you will raise militias when you needed them. And appropriations could only be given for, I believe it was 2 years for the Army, for the support of anything, because they wanted to make sure that we did not go that. And I think this does not bode well because of the ramifications, those we haven't talked about probably or thought about today, that it opens up. Look, you can sit back and say, yeah, but they're just bad guys. But no, once you just go after them because they're a bad guy, unfortunate consequences can occur. Look, we went after Saddam Hussein. And what did we do? We created ISIS. And we took away the blocking tackle on Iran. So no longer did they have to worry about Saddam Hussein, and they could go about mischief in the Middle East. People have to understand that militaries can stop a problem. We don't fix them.
Another problem the military cannot fix is the issue of a lack of trust between the White House and its critics over the justification for authorizing the strikes on at least 4 suspected drug boats so far. From an intelligence officer standpoint, why are we seeing the final act of destruction, but not the lead up and the proof that says these guys are who we say that they are?
Yeah, and so it's a great question. And because I'm not directly involved, I just got to speak from experience and as an example. But yes, my assumption would be that they're using classified means in order to collect the information. Anytime that we're doing intelligence collection, even if it's related to law enforcement, but particularly the military, the IC overseas, a lot of our sources and methods are classified, and so it's a challenge then to present the quote unquote evidence or the information that we're going to use to target these individuals and then put it out into the public space, because we don't want anyone to know how we're gathering this information, right? They could be coming from human sources. They could be coming from technical means that we don't want China to know about, those type of things. So I understand, though, in a free democracy, how that is a challenge. I understand why the American people are like, listen, this is an open society here. If you're going to make these claims that these are bad people, then you owe it to us to show us why you think they're bad people and you're making these decisions. I get that from a conceptual standpoint, right? But from a national security standpoint, it's really, really hard to do.
As of publication, most of the military actions aimed against the cartels labeled as foreign terrorist organizations has taken place at sea in international waters. And while it's certainly causing tensions, all of that will get ramped up even more if the strikes start taking place on land. President Trump says he may consider such actions in the future, a move which will no doubt ignite plenty more legal discussions and potential courtroom battles. For more reporting like this, download the Straight Arrow News app today.